part 2 of my very informal talk on using R to get data from a REST API for a database. And in part 2, I'm going to talk about how I created a R client. And so this is an R package that I can use and others can use to access the StreamNet Coordinated Assessments REST API. So here's the package. You go here, kind of see what it does, and basically you can load it up and you can tell it what you want. In this case, I want NIMS pop ID 7, and then you can just run this function, boom, and it returns the table and kind of formats it in the way that we need it. So you can see it's going to make it really easy to get some data from this database. So how did I go about doing this? So I had never done this before, so I certainly wasn't an expert. So first what I did is I found an example of one of these that was really easy to understand. And the one I used was from R OpenSci. It was the R Red List R package, and it was really well laid out, well documented, and super easy for me to follow. So first thing I did is I went to the source code. So I'm going to show mine, but the R Red List one looks very similar. And so when I started, theirs looked kind of like this, and I got rid of everything except the description file and this R folder right here. That's all I needed in the beginning. Kept it really super simple. And then in here, I kind of had to poke around a bit, but figured out that this was the core function. This is the one that does the get function, the call, and then I think that it also uses some things in utils. Okay, so I had to have these two files to start with. I got rid of everything else. So now I'm going to talk about this this file and the functions in here. So this is the core thing you want to work on in the beginning. Okay, so these are the key functions for my package. This is the one that just does a general query, and then these are the ones for me that get the tables, and then this one is calling that one. I'm only going to talk now about this one because if you are trying to write one of these, once you get this thing written and working, everything's going to fall into place after that. So what does this function do? All it does is it does that get call. And so it's actually not that hard to get working. It's all it's doing is constructing that URL. Okay, so goal 1 was to get a call like this working, and then step 2, my goal was to get it working like this. And you see that there's a difference here. This one doesn't have any query parameters, and this one does. Okay, so let's just jump on into this. Okay, okay, so if you go into my repo and you take a look at the function, it looks kind of like this. It does look like this. This is what it looks like. So first thing to notice is that it's not using HTTR. It's using this package to do the get. I can't tell you why our Red List did that, but this is a really recent one, and our OpenSci makes really good R packages. So I was like, I think they know what they're doing. I'm just going to do things the way they did. So this is, if you look at the R, it's called RL get in the R Red List package, you'll see their function looks pretty much exactly like this. I had to make a couple of changes. So in this function, there are really just three things that you need to be focusing on. First is the URL, and that's appearing right here. That your URL, that's going to be everything up to the question mark. So this part here needs to, one way or another, return everything up to the question mark. Query. So this is the query parameters as a list. And that is, so here it is, query right here. So it needs to equal, this part here needs to be a list with all the query parameters. Okay, so this bit right here needs to return a list. And then the only other thing you kind of need to care about is this part here, the user agent. And it's optional, like you could like just get rid of that. But it's good to have it in there. It's a string. It's going to tell the database who you are. So it knows that it's going to show up in their logs who's hitting their database. So let's hop in and take a look at this and kind of do a little detective work here. So here's that original function or call with HTTR that I could get working. And so you can see I know that this is a URL that will work. So let's take this apart. So first thing, there we go. That is all the URL up to, as I said, up to the question mark. So when I look at this code, this part here needs to return everything up to the question mark. So that means I've got this thing called arcax base, and then I've got this thing called path, which is being passed in the arcax get function. So that kind of clues me in that this should be a function that just returns a string for the base. Okay, easy enough. And then I know that path that I'm going to be calling here, it's going to be equal to this KA JSON. So, and that should not be a single tick. It should be I guess it can't be a single tick here. But anyhow, it's a string. It's a string here. Okay, and now let's look at the query. Where's the query? Right here, query. So here in my actual code, you'll see its query is I kind of have the API key in there. And now I'm going to make it a little simpler for you. And I'm going to say, no, I'm just going to say it's equal to query. And query is this thing right here that we're passing into that arcax get function. So the question is, what is it that I am passing in? So I said it's got to be a list of your parameters, query parameters. And let's go back up to the URL. What are they? Okay, we got table ID. So here we go. Table ID equals, grab it from that. And what else do I have there? XAPI key, so that, and it needs to equal that. Okay, should not have that extra one there. What else do we have? We have page equals 1. There we go. And per page equals 10. So there we go. So that's how you set that up. And now if I do arcax get and just call that function, passing in path and passing in query as this list, it should work. At least that's the goal. That's what you want to get working. Okay, so hopefully by me kind of walking through this, if you jump into this function yourself, it'll kind of make sense what's going on and just make it easier for you to start editing that. I want to talk about one other thing that was really hard for me, and it was figuring out how to filter. So I wanted to retrieve data for a particular population. So the tables I'm getting back have columns, and one of the columns is pop ID. And I wanted to be able to say, hey, I want to get only the data for pop ID 1. I don't want to get everything. I mean, these are massive tables. I don't want to, I certainly didn't want to download 10,000 things just to try to get like pop ID, which maybe only has 10 rows. That wouldn't make any sense. So I wanted to be able to put somehow in my URL that I only want the data for pop ID equals 1. Now, yeah, I kind of alluded to this in my first video, that this REST API seems to have been designed mainly for people to push data up and not really for people to pull data down, at least from the REST API. So there wasn't any information about how to do that filtering. And I did a lot of Google searching, and nothing that I could come up with worked. There are a few different approaches you could take, and I didn't know how they'd set it up, and I didn't even know what I should ask them, so I couldn't kind of ask them. But I just kept searching and searching, trying to understand it, and I stumbled across being able to pass in a parameter called filter. So it's a parameter, so it's filter equal, and with that, a little help from ChatGPT to tell me the format of these things, I was kind of able to figure it out. It still took a while to figure out that what I needed to pass into this filter was JSON. And the reason it took me a long time to do that is that there's, like, I could find information on these filters, but there are different ways that you can pass the information into that filter. And it turned out that the really obvious things that were being suggested to me, like, pop ID :1 or pop ID equals 1 or something like that, none of those things worked. And I just kind of stumbled by luck, figuring out that actually what this REST API wanted was JSON. So once I had that, I could figure it out. And if you look in the code here, you'll see that filter that I'm creating. Mine might not help you, though, because your REST API may filter in a completely different way. All right. Hope that was helpful.